Joining us for today's conversation is State Senator Nathan Johnson. Many of you will have seen him in Texas Impact videos in the past talking about Medicaid expansion on a whiteboard right here in the office. Senator Johnson, thank you so much for joining us today.
So glad to be here.
One of the things
I'm serious. I am glad to be here.
I'm also glad that you're here. I'm maybe less glad that you're here in the city of Austin today as opposed to being back home where you represent 1 million Dallas County residents. But it is a crazy time here in Austin. You're still here post regular sine die. How's that feeling? How did you enjoy your very brief summer break?
Yeah, summer was about 6 hours. And it was great. I really enjoyed the time off. We're back here doing the work of the state that the legislative process didn't manage to get done in the 140 days that we allot for it.
I hope you don't take this personally when I say I hope you get a chance to go home soon and not spend all summer here, but we are glad that you're in the building today.
Well, I appreciate being here with Texas Impact. I really do, and admire all the work you do.
That's kind. And one of the things that Texans Faith really cared about this legislative session had to do with the grid. And many of us remember sitting in the cold for hours or even days a couple of years ago. And post-Winter Storm Uri, state leaders felt like they made some progress. They said that they had fixed some things, but this session came back with a bunch of new proposals, including building a lot of new natural gas capacity. So what happened in the interim between last session and this session, and what's the cost to consumers at the end of this legislative session?
Ooh, there's a lot in there. Let's start with the idea that as far as the political rhetoric was concerned, the grid went from being broken to fixed to broken and fixed.
It's a miracle.
It's a series of them, really.
Right.
But it's also a very, very complex topic. So the first thing I'd like to look at is the lens that we all viewed the grid through, and it's Uri. And it was traumatic, and it was deadly, and it was extremely expensive, and it was really a nightmare for all of us. And so when we looked at, quote, fixing the grid, the main idea that sticks with people and that legislators were primarily concerned with the session prior to this one was avoiding another Uri.
Right.
That's the emergency. There's a completely separate question about our grid, and that is, how do we have enough power for a growing state? Growing in industrial uses of electricity, growing in high-tech uses of electricity, growing in the number of residents who are here in a very hot and a very cold place. That is a very real challenge. Now, emergencies and adequacy of electrical resources are not necessarily the same thing. The session before this one, we really did do a lot of good work to try to prevent the kind of catastrophe that caused so much harm to this state a couple of years ago. We not only kind of structurally reorganized the governing entities of our electrical system, kind of ensuring that more and more appropriate voices would be heard, we did some things like mapping out where all the resources are that rely on each other. So we will not have a spiral of shutdowns when we can't get gas to a generator, which means a generator can't get electricity to the gas supply, which means the gas supply can't get gas to the generator, and on down.
Right.
It involved also making sure that we had notification systems. We did a lot of good work to try to prevent catastrophes. But a couple of things were left to solve. First of all, when we identified all these critical resources, kind of everything became critical. Well, now who do we shut off the next time that we have a problem with insufficient electricity? Everybody's critical. How do we manage load shed? That's a critical issue that we hadn't previously examined. And then the next one is the one I was talking about, is how do we get enough electricity in this market? Over the last 20 years, much to the benefit of this state and to the environment, we have had an explosion of growth in clean, sustainable, cheap electricity. The problem has been that wind power doesn't flow when the wind doesn't blow. Solar power doesn't come to us when the sun's not shining. So where is that reliability element that we need? Our traditional fossil fuels are generally more available. We call that dispatchable. Coal plants, filthy. I don't lament their demise. Now, when we're talking about natural gas, if it's properly regulated and properly run, it can be done pretty cleanly. It's not as clean as solar. It's not as clean as wind. But it's quick, and it can be pretty clean. So we could use some more of that to have a stable grid in Texas. The problem is wind and solar are so cheap. It makes it difficult for natural gas generation to compete. Right. So, we have this devotion to markets in Texas, and in the electrical space, it's yielded a lot of really good progress, including in renewables. But the way the market is set up right now, it's pretty much impossible to bring on dispatchable generation. So this whole session was spent figuring out, how do we get to that dispatchable goal? Is it batteries hooked up to solar and wind farms? Maybe. Is it new gas-fired generation? Maybe. All of that? Probably.
Yeah, and so what was the final outcome? Where did we land this legislative session?
This legislative session, we managed to avoid being too punitive to renewable energy. And personally, I think that would be a mistake, because all those federal subsidies for renewable energy, they go straight into our pockets in the form of savings, in the form of new jobs. It's really good for Texas. It's good for Texas industry. It's good for consumers. I don't want to chase away renewable energy. I think that there was a narrative this session that if we just chase away enough renewable energy, natural gas plants will suddenly appear. And I think that's a complete fallacy. However, we did need to do something to incentivize the construction in the near term of dispatchable energy, and batteries aren't quite ready to deliver us yet, and the infrastructure that would make that work is not there yet. So there was a lot of money and a lot of planning devoted towards incentivizing generators to invest in new gas-fired generation. Now, we did that without, again, being overly punitive to renewables. So it may be a good balance. There's still, I think I said in a hearing one time, I've never seen so many people with so much expertise disagree with each other so intensely on this subject. I don't think anybody knows whether what's come out of the legislative session is the best solution. But I will say there's been a lot of good faith work by people in both chambers, both parties. It's supposed to be not a very partisan issue. Almost everything descends into partisanship at some point. But I think on the grid issues, much less so. And I worked very closely with Democrats and Republicans this session. So I'm hopeful that we have a workable mix here. Legislative work is never done. We are going to have to watch and see how markets respond, whether the needs of the state are met, and make changes 16, 18 months from now, if necessary. Now, the Public Utility Commission and ERCOT, they can make changes on the fly. And I think we've given them the tools to make changes on the fly. The question is, have we put so many constraints on them that it'll be difficult for them to respond in the way they need? And I'll pause because I know you're dying to ask me a question, but there is another component to all of this, and that's apart from adequacy and emergencies.
Oh, keep rolling if you've got that next part geared up and ready to go.
Well, I guess it isn't separate from emergencies, but if we've solved the resource adequacy problem, if we have enough generation sometime in the next couple of years, no worry whether it's a backup system off the market, whether it's in-market systems, wind, solar, gas, whatever it is, let's just pretend we've got plenty of generation capacity. We had a few yahoos with automatic machine guns shooting out transformers in North Carolina and Washington in the past year. Right. Could easily happen in Texas. Could there be a cyber attack by a hostile foreign nation? This is not outlandish stuff. It really could happen. Right. There are reports of threats in Texas trying to take out the grid. I do think we need to be prepared for deliberate human sabotage, in addition to the natural disasters that inevitably we fail to anticipate, however hard we might try. The storm that's bigger than Uri, the hurricane that's bigger than those that have devastated, a series of tornadoes, whatever it is, we will have an emergency. And that is the subject, to me, of grid resiliency. How well do we stand up to these inevitable, unpredictable, and sometimes predictable challenges? Happily, I had a bill this session. It was Senate Bill 2112 that proposed to put into place a series of very small generators, enough power to keep an assisted living facility caring for the elderly up and running for a couple of days if someone shoots out the transformers, if a tornado takes down all the power lines and it takes 2 days to get a truck across the road, right? We need these backup systems in place for police stations, a small town where there's one gas station or one grocery store, regional hospital systems, a warming center that serves the public from the site of a high school. Some way that we can make sure that the things that are essential to a community don't go away.
Right.
And we can do so at a reasonable investment. And that bill was absorbed into the main energy packages. It was absorbed into Senate Bill 2627 and appropriated they gave $1.8 billion to building these small backup generators around the state. Really cool program. We're going to design them, bid them out, and a small municipality with a water tower that they need to keep running or a water treatment system is going to be able to buy those together with a local investment and a grant from the state, probably pull down some federal money. And so if we do that, if we've mapped out critical facilities, if we've increased our dispatchable generation, if we have a steady supply of clean, cheap energy, and we have these emergency backup systems that can operate throughout the state, decentralized power backup system that cannot be taken out with a single strike, I think then we can say to the public, yeah, we fixed the grid.
Yeah. That might have come in handy. I live in Huntsville, and many might have seen in the news that we had what was apparently not a tornado, but a significant wind event that knocked out power for half a town, half of the city for 2 or 3 days. And so that definitely would have been a benefit. You mentioned Senate Bill 2627 talking about the Texas Power Promise. Was there anything else in that bill or that piece of legislation that folks should know about?
Yeah, that bill was probably the single largest, at least from a financial perspective, bill that was passed this session regarding the grid. They took my bill and absorbed it into it to kind of have a comprehensive package. Senate Bill 2627 had 2 primary components aside from the backup systems that it brought in. One is a very large bucket of money for loans at, I think it was going to be 2 or 3. I can't remember. It was a bunch of haggling at the end of session over how low the interest rate was going to be, but it's a very, very low interest rate, significantly reducing the capital costs for anybody who wants to invest in new gas-fired generation. It is limited to gas-fired generation. It will not be for a solar farm or a wind farm paired with batteries or hydrogen, clean hydrogen generation or hydro storage. It is for gas-fired generation. The second component of that is a completion bonus that says if you actually go ahead and build with this low-interest loan or with other capital, we will give you a big chunk of money that offsets part of your costs. And it can be viewed, and often is viewed, and to some extent appropriately is viewed, as giving money to investors in power generation. We have a market and we want people to build this stuff. And because of other market dynamics, including really good, useful federal subsidies for renewable energy, it's hard to be competitive without having some other economic incentive. So that whole package was designed to make it attractive for people to invest in power generation from natural gas here in Texas.
You mentioned a couple of minutes ago about the next 16 to 18 months. And it's clear leaving this legislative session that there's still significant work that needs to be done. Texans of faith care deeply about renewable energy. And so I wonder if you can spend a minute talking about the messaging that you would recommend for our listeners while they're out during campaign season or meeting with their representatives during the interim. What's the message they should be conveying to their elected officials if they care about renewable energy here in Texas?
I really think the long-term vision involves renewable sources. Solar and wind are very, very well established. There are other forms of renewable energy that are being developed rapidly right now. And while it's well and good to have our good stable supply of traditional natural gas-fired generation, long-term, the world is moving towards renewable energy, and we need to, and Texas can be a leader in that. So as far as the messaging goes, I want people to accept that we need some fossil fuel generation here in Texas, but not lose sight of the fact that where we're going is newer ways of generating power. And the So to support it politically and socially is important. The other factor is, and I know you know this in your work, the public can participate in renewable energy. The public can participate. The public already is participating. People have solar panels on their roofs. Communities can build their own very small, either backup generation systems or generation systems that they use to sell power back into the grid. Could be solar, could be wind, could even be some combination of natural gas, wind, and solar. These are microgrids that are popping up around the state. We can also see, and those are usually done at the commercial level right now, because it's very expensive to build them. And by commercial level, I mean something like a large grocery store or a Buc-ee's.
Or a congregation.
Or maybe a congregation of individuals who have solar panels on their roofs or on places of worship that when taken in the aggregate, if you connect all those dots, you have essentially a generation facility. And one of the good developments this session was Senate Bill 1699, which I carried. It clarifies and sets up a regulatory regime for aggregating small points of energy, like someone's house or the roof of a congregation, and we call them aggregated distributed energy resources, ADERs. And we will see growth in that space. And over time, it could be significant. It likely will be.
Yeah, and the Inflation Reduction Act can help congregations or places of worship finance that work, right? What can you say? Maybe challenge some of our congregations to get involved in that?
Sure. The Inflation Reduction Act, as well as the IJAA, both have portions of tranches of funds dedicated to sustainable renewable energy sources. And there are programs set up to partner with communities, to partner with states, to partner with cities. They're probably complex and require some people to spend some time. But there is a great deal of support out there for continuing to develop not just renewable resources, but these renewable resources. I am talking about renewable resources. The benefits go beyond how clean they are and how sustainable they are. It also is a sort of energy independence and a stability.
Right.
Because all this power that we're building, which is very important, but all of these big generation facilities we're building depend on the transmission system, the big, gigantic, high voltage cables that are strung throughout the state and throughout the nation. If you're talking about rooftop solar or a small wind turbine in your backyard or micro nuclear generation, those things are independent of the grid. They're available in an emergency. And the rest of the time, when the grid is working, they're selling power back in. Now, one of the cool things about having these distributed energy resources at the personal level and at the aggregated level is that ERCOT, the people who manage the grid, or outside of ERCOT, other grids that are managed, they have to respond in real time. And sometimes it's very small fluctuations they have to accommodate. There's a physics formula, V equals IR, voltage equals current times resistance. And all the pieces of equipment that are on the line out there that make sure your lights come on and that your oxygen machine works and that the baseball pitchback machine that you plug in is pitching at the right speed. All this stuff is built around that simple little equation, V equals IR. And the grid managers at ERCOT are watching it. And if one of those letters goes up or down, the others better go up or down accordingly. Because if they don't, if there's too much of a variance, stuff blows up.
Right.
And when the stuff blows up, it goes dark. So getting back to our micro nukes or our aggregated distributed energy resources, the grid managers need to be able to turn stuff on and off in small amounts or big amounts very, very quickly. And the more independent points of power we have, the easier it is for them to call upon you, okay, drop off the grid, use your backup. Or, hey, we need to aggregate your backup and pull it in, and we need to do it in the next 3 minutes. Right? And that kind of versatility is contributing to the resiliency of our grid overall.
Well, that's important stuff, and we still have a lot of work to do. Senator, I know you are here for the special session. Anything else that folks should be paying attention to right now that you want to highlight for our listeners today?
Well, special sessions are I wish we had solved this previously. I do hope they'll stay tuned into what we're doing right now. There are a couple of issues on this call. There will be some on the next call. I certainly have opinions about them. I know I've been very objective on the grid stuff and nonpartisan. I've got some slightly more partisan views on some of the things coming up this summer. We'll be talking about, I assume we're going to be talking about school vouchers later this summer. I adamantly oppose them.
Our listeners have thoughts on that as well. Yeah.
Well, I'd be happy to come back and talk with people about it. To this particular call, we're looking at property tax and probably a very, very narrow set of border issues. There's a lot to say about those. On the property tax issue, we kind of have a standoff between what's being called the House version and the Senate version. And it's very difficult to see a way out of it right now because it's just kind of, it's a game of chicken right now.
Sounds like some people need to get in a room and figure it out. Well, I appreciate that. Any shameless plugs you'd like to leave us with today?
Oh, shameless. Shameful?
I'll give you shameful. I'll give you shameful.
Yes, you know what? I'll throw in a couple of plugs.
All right.
And I want to talk about the property tax thing that we're dealing with this summer. There's a House version, there's a Senate version, and that contest is going to work itself out. But what's not part of the conversation right now is the size of what we're doing. Everybody, Democrats and Republicans, likes to see our property taxes come down, and we're going to compress them, and we're going to raise the homestead, and everybody's going to have to pay a little less money in taxes. Yay. 17-point-something billion we're allocating to this, and we're putting no money towards expanding Medicaid.
Right.
We're not putting substantial amounts of money right now, or at least not the levels we should be in public education. And let me get back to housing for a second. I actually had a bill that would have put a bunch of money into trying to develop more affordable housing. Now, I don't mean to take away property tax reduction. We can have billions of dollars going to property tax reduction and still have allocated some money to help the very people who don't own houses own a house. How much money are we spending on that? So as we're looking at this property tax discussion, I hope people will ask larger questions about what we should be doing. I support property tax reductions, but I also think there's more we could be doing to help more people be able to afford homes. And let's look at one thing else related to that. Sorry for running long on my shameless plug.
You're rolling. I'm going to let you keep going as long as you want.
But what we're doing right now is, in effect, making homes more valuable by decreasing the property taxes that they have to pay and not making the housing stock itself grow, which is going to make houses more expensive, which is going to mean that people who don't yet have a house are going to have an even harder time buying one. I think we need to look not just at property taxes, but the overall pressure that's driving the price of housing up in Texas. California's had this problem. New York has had this problem. Texas is now going to have that problem, and we need to start paying attention to it.
Amen. Senator, that'll preach. I just want to say in closing out today, I know the Texas legislature is a part-time legislature, and you, news to you, right? But you and your colleagues are doing extra work this year, and I just really appreciate you taking a portion of your life to do this important service on behalf of Texans, both in your district and throughout the state. So thank you for your service, and thanks for the time today.
Thank you, Scott. I really appreciate being here.